Precipitation reactions. So the first experiment that you did, when you added the different solutions to copper sulfate, you just got one reaction where you got a precipitate. So copper sulfate plus sodium hydroxide gave you a precipitate. So let's think about what's in the copper sulfate solution. It's not solid bits of copper sulfate, it's Cu2 plus ions and sulfate, SO4, 2 minus ions. And then what's in the sodium hydroxide solution? We've got Na plus ions and hydroxide ions. So those ionic solids separate and we get all those ions in the solutions. Then we mix them together into our test tube. So we'll put our plus sign in our formula equation and we get a precipitate, so it goes all cloudy. We have to work out what is the precipitate. We're going to have copper steel and sodium steel, so I'm going to write copper and sodium. So the metals have to stay separate. Obviously the precipitate can't be something we started with, so we've got a swapping over of the ions. Now, sodium has a valence of 1, it's plus, sulfate 2 minus. So we've got sodium sulfate here, and we've got to put a little 2 there because we've got 1 plus and 2 minus. Now, the copper then has to join with the hydroxide, and that's a bit tricky as well because the hydroxide's 1 minus, the copper's 2 plus. So we need to have 2 hydroxides. So that's the reaction that's taken place. Now we should put in our little symbols to make it an accurate equation. So remember that the AQ, what does that stand for? There's solutions in water, so it stands for aqueous. Then we've got the copper hydroxide and the sodium sulfate. Now, if you remember that all alkali metals are soluble, that means it can't be this one. The precipitate has to be copper hydroxide. And so we have a little solid here, but this remains in solution. Now, can you remember how to balance your equation up? Let's look at this. We've got 2 hydroxides, but we've only got 1 here. So we've got 2 hydroxides there, but we've only got 1 here. So the way to fix that is to put a 2 in front of the sodium, in front of the sodium hydroxide. So now let's look at the sodiums. We've got 2 here, and we've got 2 there. So the sodiums are balanced. Let's check the coppers. We've got 1 here and 1 here. So the coppers are balanced. And the sulfate, we've got 1 sulfate on each side. And so we have our balanced chemical equation, our formula equation, describing this precipitation reaction. Now have a go at doing the rest yourself. Be good practice with writing the formulas and with balancing the equation.